So while on the Board of Corrections, I was able to understand, you know, the building of prisons. We were stick building. We were using brick and mortar and not precast construction. And so modular construction. So we were able to get in and talk to some of the staff members because the culture was we will take 4 or 5 years to design and build one, and that's what we do. So by serving in on that board and understanding that aspect of it was very important as an architect to deal with that. Now I went off on a tangent. I wanted to stop smoking in the prisons. And basically, now, Robert, you're going down a real slippery slope right now. They said, you need to stay with building. You don't need to get it trying to stop smoking. But since I've been on the board at Grady and I saw how smoking affected the health of individuals, I went down that road. Well, I never knew the issue that would come up with my legislators, as it related to smoking. We stopped smoking, but it created a black market in the prisons. I mean, a whole lot of things occurred, but the key was to reduce healthcare costs. They were approaching $700–800 million. That's a lot of money. And so it was important to be able to do that. So as an architect, you also can influence other aspects that don't necessarily mean planning and design. So those are some key areas in giving back the time and why I'm passionate about it. Now, why I think architects ought to be involved in public service. I'm gonna talk a moment more about the State Transportation Board. That's the particular one that now I'm involved in. And I think it's very important to understand that how transportation impacts architects. Two things have happened here recently. One was the Georgia 400 extension of the toll. Wherever you come down on that, I mean, that's okay. The issue here was back when Georgia 400 was under consideration. I wasn't on the board, and that was a commitment that was made that once the bonds were paid off, that the tolls would come off of Georgia 400. But look what Georgia 400 has done for economic development. Look at that corridor at Georgia 400. You put the infrastructure in, increase the density. The other parts come. That's why the belt line is so important, for metropolitan Atlanta, for those of you who are in metropolitan Atlanta. And that's why the grip system, if you're in other parts of the state of Georgia, is so important to have access to the main interstates, through the state. So when I step back right now and to see how we have a role in it, and it's been chairing the planning committee, this is what I see. And this is what I asked Todd Long, the director of planning, is that we need to be able to visualize Georgia 30 years out, all right? And a simulation to be able to see the high-speed rail coming from Chattanooga to Atlanta, Charlotte, on up to Washington, D.C. Be able to see model expanded into those areas to create higher density. To be able to see commuter rail, to be able to go throughout the state of Georgia to create tourism and connect Georgia. Because we always talk about Georgia being two Georgias. Georgia needs to be one Georgia. And it's important for us to be able to connect it with transportation. And with that framework comes economic development. Now, another quick story. A couple of weeks ago, now when I joined the Georgia Chamber, I don't know if you all hunt, but I had never fired a gun. But I was on the Georgia Chamber, and you have to go on what they call the fall feather hunt. And that means you hunt quail. A little nervous about it, but that was back 7, 8 years ago. But just 3 weeks ago, they called it the Georgia quail hunt now. And so while I was there, I go down and I entertain. I'm a buddy to prospects throughout the entire state of Georgia. That means we're trying to encourage them to come and do business in Georgia, create jobs, all those different things. And so while we were down there, Phil Wheelhite is the chairman of Governor Deal's campaign. He was the chair of the Georgia Quail Hunt. And the reason I tell you this story, why you have to be prepared, is we were getting ready to go on the bus. You know how you have a little reception before the dinner. He said, Robert, he said, it's foggy out there tonight. I was wondering why was he talking about how foggy it is. He said it was raining out there. He said, Lieutenant Governor's not going to be able to make it. And he said, I want to know if you'll be able to fill in as a speaker tonight. I said, speaker where? He said, speaker at the Double Gate Country Club. And I said, what do you want me to talk about? He said, economic development. Talk about how we want to entice businesses to come to Georgia. And I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll just tell you the first part of the story. Doug Carter, who's the chairman of the Georgia Chamber, he introduced me. Now, you have to know that these guests, they had no idea what the Lieutenant Governor looked like. And so they weren't quite aware that the Lieutenant Governor would not be there. So when Doug got up to introduce me, similar to the way Ed did, he said, we have Robert Brown here tonight, and he is he's a graduate of Tuskegee, he's an architect, and he introduced me as the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Georgia. Everybody stood up. You know, I had to stand up for the governor, and I had to sit down. So they still, well, I could see they were whispering to each other because I had been there with them a couple of days, and I hadn't told them I was the Lieutenant Governor. But the bottom line was, when I stood up to speak, I said there's been a lot of unrest in Egypt over the last few weeks, and you know they now have a new leader. And I said there was also a lot of unrest in Georgia last night, and I became Lieutenant Governor of the state of Georgia. and they all laughed and they had a lot of fun. And then I went on to talk about economic development to sort of break the ice so they wouldn't be disappointed that Lieutenant Governor was not there. But then I went on to talk about how important, you know, livable communities are. And being as an architect and being able to communicate that and be an architect and be able to talk about it and have legislators there as well, you know, it just elevates what we do. And just think about all the talent we have in this room, the talent we have in this region, the talent we have in this state. We can elevate the stature of architects, and we can also be in an influential position to guide decisions. I can't tell you how many times I've been on these boards where just a perspective gives them the opportunity to consider another way of doing things. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to get engaged. We have to cultivate relationships. I'm not talking about networking. I'm talking about cultivating relationships, getting to know people, understanding their background, their families, where they're from, what they like. All of those things are important, and we have the gifts to be able to harness all of them. So that's why I think architects ought to be engaged. That's why I like the fact you're going over to the Capitol to communicate with them and let them know what influence and impact we have in this region and in this state on the quality of life. Thank you all for allowing me. You all have any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Robert?
I think the key to getting business to Georgia is education. And Atlanta right now is just a disaster. Any thoughts about what can be done to clean up that?
Well, let me say this. I didn't touch much on education. I recently chaired the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. And the reason that I got involved in education because I saw exactly what you did, what you saw, the thread that goes through everything we talk about. And I think it gets back to having sound policies, public policy decisions. You know, like the other day I read about, well, we got to make a decision whether we support House Bill 277, which deals with transportation, or whether we the SPLOS that we are so concerned about as it relates to, you know, sales tax dollars for construction, whether we forego that or not. But what I think is we have to find safe spaces to talk about those critical issues, right? I mean, I'm over in DeKalb County, and DeKalb County, I can tell you from my perspective in education, they just went through that recent consolidation. They did it with transparency. They said, look, we have to consolidate the schools. We're gonna have some lines redrawn, but we want to be transparent about it. Come out and tell us everything that you want us to know. And they did that, and it appears to me that they came out with a very good decision. So I believe that doing the research. I mean, the research I was part of starting a charter school on Memorial Drive, which is Tech High. We started that from the ground up. Really, I wanted to do something in architecture, engineering, construction. But we were able to work with individuals to deal with math, science, and technology. So it was sort of the same thing in doing that. And uplifting education, getting involved with those board members, having sidebars, not trying to get work from them, talking about public policy decisions that are going to have an impact on economic development. I can tell you when I was down in South Georgia, they all talked about education systems. When those companies are looking to come into your particular community, they look first at education. They look at the schools, where they're going to get their workers, and what the quality of those workers are going to be. And when they can see that they're going to have a workforce that can support their businesses, I think that they feel good about it. And I always like to look at the glass half full. It may be perceived as being a mess, but a lot of good things have come out of perceived mess. And so I think that we have to look at, I think you call it lemonade out of lemons and all those different kinds of things. But I believe that when you get dinged and it starts to affect your image, I think you want to look for solutions that are going to be good for your community. And the business community has to get involved. Architects need to get involved. Just the talent that we have. We just get involved, it will just flow. And then people will recognize that we need an architect on our board. We need an architect on our committee. They'll be looking for you, and then you'll be in demand.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all very much.